My name is Martha Wilson. I'm 71 years old now, and I feel like I've only just begun to live. For 42 years, my husband Henry beat me. It started on our wedding night. A slap, because, according to him, I had looked too long at one of his friends. He apologized the next day, told me it would never happen again. I believed him. I still remember that Sunday, the day everything changed. The dry sound of Henry's palm against my cheek echoed through our dining room, like thunder in the silence. We were at our house in Augusta, having our weekly family lunch. My son Charles and his wife Mary were there with their children. Little Johnny, 6 years old, Lucy, 9, and Robert, 12. The table was set with the china I only used for special occasions. I had spent the entire morning cooking Henry's favorite meal, chicken and dumplings with gravy, just the way his mother used to make it. Nobody dared to breathe. The children's eyes widened in shock at the scene they had never witnessed so clearly. Henry, 72 years old and with his fist still clenched, looked around as if challenging anyone to say something. I kept my head down, my cheek burning red, while with trembling hands I tried to pick up the pieces of the glass I had dropped, the incident that had unleashed my husband's fury. "See what your clumsiness causes," Henry growled. 42 years of marriage, and you still don't know how to serve properly. Mary, my observant daughter-in-law who had been married to Charles for 8 years, felt something breaking inside her. It wasn't just the glass. It was an invisible barrier, a silent pact to ignore the obvious that she had maintained during all those years of Sunday visits. My hands trembled as I picked up the glass shards. Mary had seen me like this many times. Quiet, submissive, with bruises I explained as, "I fell in the kitchen," or "I tripped over the coffee table." She had seen me lower my gaze when Henry raised his voice, change the subject when someone asked why I was so quiet. Invisible marks that everyone had chosen not to see. The dining room, decorated with decades of memories, still held the aroma of fresh-baked biscuits and gravy I had prepared since dawn. The thick sauce, the butter-fried chicken, the herbs and spices formed a symphony that now contrasted with the heaviness of the atmosphere. The television murmured in the adjoining living room, where ESPN was broadcasting some football game that no one was watching anymore. Charles, my 40-year-old son who had grown up in that home, remained paralyzed, eyes fixed on his plate. His knuckles were white as he gripped his fork so tightly it looked like it might bend. It had always been like this. Tension, silences, and then everyone pretending nothing had happened. But this time was different. This time, Mary was there, who had never learned to stay quiet. "Enough!" Mary's voice cut through the air like a knife. "That this stops now." She stood up, trembling not from fear, but from rage accumulated over years. Her normally warm brown eyes now burned with fierce determination. "Who do you think you are, young lady?" Henry drew himself up to his full height, the authority of decades weighing in every syllable. "Nobody raises their voice in my house." Mary didn't back down. She stared directly into the eyes of the man who had terrorized an entire family for years. This isn't just your house, it's Martha's too. And I won't let you keep hurting her, especially not in front of my children, in front of your own grandchildren. What kind of example is this?" The children started crying. Lucy clung to Robert, while Johnny ran to his mother. The little one had never seen his grandfather like this, with that vein bulging on his forehead, with those fists threatening to fall again. Mary took her son in her arms without taking her eyes off Henry. "Charles," she said firmly, "it's your mother. Are you going to just sit there?" And then the unthinkable happened. Charles Wilson, who for 40 years had learned the art of looking the other way, slowly stood up. His hands no longer trembled when he walked around the table to stand by me. The final hook of this first part hung in the air as Charles, for the first time in his life, positioned himself between his father and his mother, confronting the man who had raised him in fear. "This ends today, Dad," he said, in a voice that didn't sound like his own. No more. The silence that followed Charles's words seemed to freeze the air in our Augusta home. Henry, with his white button-up shirt now stained with gravy, looked at our son as if suddenly faced with a stranger. His eyes, small and hard like obsidian, narrowed dangerously. "What did you say?" Henry's voice was deceptively soft, like the hiss of a snake before striking. Charles swallowed hard. Sweat beaded on his forehead under the intense Georgia summer heat that seeped through the windows adorned with curtains I had hand-embroidered years ago. But he didn't back down. "I said, this ends today, Dad. I won't let you hurt Mom anymore." I raised my eyes for the first time, my hands, calloused from decades of making biscuits and washing clothes by hand, stopped picking up the shards of glass. On my cheek, the red mark from the slap was beginning to darken. "Charles, son, it's not necessary," I whispered with that voice that seemed to apologize for existing. Mary approached me, still holding Johnny in her arms. The little boy was sobbing silently, his face hidden in his mother's neck. "Yes, it is necessary, Martha," Mary said firmly but gently. "It's enough now." Memories hit Mary like waves. The times she had seen me flinch when someone raised their voice, the way I always served Henry the best portion of food first, how I asked permission to visit my own sister in Atlanta, the bruises on my arms that I explained away as household accidents, the warning glances when Mary tried to inquire further. Henry drew himself up to his full height. Despite his age, he was still an imposing man, with broad shoulders from years of working construction before opening his hardware store in downtown Augusta. The vein in his temple visibly pulsed. "You're going to come into my house and tell me how to treat my wife." His voice rose, making the children cower. "This woman is mine. She's belonged to me for 42 years. You don't understand anything." Robert, the oldest grandson, clenched his fists. At 12 years old, his eyes reflected a maturity forced by what he was now witnessing. Lucy clung to his arm, trembling. "Mom is not a thing, Dad." Charles's words came out firmly. "She doesn't belong to you. She's a person." The ceiling fan turned lazily, distributing the hot May air in our yellow-walled house with its hardwood floors. Family photographs hung on the walls seemed to observe the scene with glass eyes. Weddings, baptisms, first communions, moments when the Wilson family pretended to be normal and happy. "Ungrateful," roared Henry. "Is this how you repay everything I've done for you? Everything I gave you? The education, the house you live in." Charles felt the weight of 40 years of submission and fear. He remembered the times when, as a child, he heard the screams from his bedroom, head under the pillow, pretending not to hear my muffled crying. The mornings when I appeared at the breakfast table wearing dark glasses, serving coffee as if nothing had happened. "What you gave me, Dad." Charles took a deep breath. "You gave me fear. You taught me to be a coward, to look the other way while you abused my mother." The humidity of the Georgia afternoon seeped through the walls, like the truths now flooding the dining room. The grandfather clock in the corner, an old wedding gift to us, struck 2 o'clock with a sound that seemed like a gunshot amid the tension. Henry took a threatening step toward Charles, his fist raised. "Nobody disrespects me in my house," he hissed. That's when I did something no one expected. I stood up, slowly, as if each movement cost me superhuman effort. My floral dress, worn by years, fluttered slightly as I positioned myself next to my son and daughter-in-law. "No more, Henry," I said in a voice that seemed rusty from disuse. "No more." Henry's eyes widened in surprise, then fury. It was the first time in decades that I had openly defied him. "You too, Martha?" The disbelief in his voice was palpable. "After everything I've done for you? You dare to raise your voice to me?" I was visibly shaking, but I didn't lower my gaze anymore. Tears ran freely down my cheeks, marked by time and suffering. "You've never done anything for me, Henry," I said with a clarity that surprised everyone. "You've only taken everything from me." The sound of a chair falling echoed the previous slap. Henry had pushed the furniture in his advance toward us, his face deformed by a rage he no longer tried to contain. The dining room of our house in Augusta became a battlefield where 42 years of silence exploded like a summer thunderstorm. Henry advanced toward me with heavy steps that made the hardwood floor creak beneath his weight. "Ungrateful woman," he bellowed. teeth clenched and face congested with anger. I took you out of poverty, gave you a house, a respectable name. And this is how you repay me. Charles stood between his father and me, his body now a protective shield. The ceiling fan continued spinning indifferently above us, barely moving the hot, thick Georgia air. Don't come any closer to her. Charles's voice no longer trembled. If you touch her, I swear I'll call the police. Robert, my oldest grandson, took the cell phone from the table with determination unusual for his 12 years. His fingers positioned on the screen, ready to dial. I already called Uncle Richard. He lied in a clear voice, mentioning Charles's younger brother, who was a police officer in Augusta. He's on his way. The lie fell like a bucket of cold water on Henry. His eyes moved quickly toward the grandfather clock, toward the door, calculating times and possibilities. Richard Wilson, his youngest son, the only one who had chosen a path different from the family business, now represented a tangible threat. Mary took advantage of that moment of doubt. With Johnny still in her arms, she gently but firmly took me by the elbow. "Let's get your things, Mother Martha," she said with serene determination. "You're coming with us today." My face reflected a mixture of terror and relief. My eyes, watery and reddened, looked at Henry like someone looking at an injured predator, with caution, with fear, but also with the certainty that his power was diminishing. I can't leave," I whispered, more out of habit than conviction. "My things, the house can wait," Mary replied as she guided me toward the hallway leading to the master bedroom. "Let's get some clothes, your medicines. We'll sort out the rest later." Lucy and Robert approached me, flanking me like little guardians. The girl, with her 9 years, took my wrinkled hand. "Grandma, there's room in our house," she said with an innocence that contrasted with the gravity of the moment. "You can sleep in my room, I have lots of pillows." Charles stood firm in front of his father, who seemed to have deflated at the threat of police intervention. The man who had terrorized an entire family for decades now seemed smaller, older, as if the hatred that sustained him was beginning to leave him. "This is madness," muttered Henry. But his voice had lost strength. "She's not going anywhere. She's my wife. She's my mother," Charles replied, pronouncing each word clearly. "Diane, she has suffered enough." In the master bedroom, Mary opened drawers and took out the essentials, some changes of clothes, the silver brush that had been my mother's, blood pressure medications, a framed wedding photograph where a young, hopeful Martha smiled at the camera with orange blossoms in my hair. I watched as if in a trance. 42 years in that house, in that life, and now everything was reduced to a small suitcase that Mary was hurriedly filling. In the vanity mirror, my reflection returned the image of a woman I barely recognized. Sunken eyes, sagging cheeks, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. The mark of the slap had already turned purplish on my sallow skin. "What if he comes for me?" I asked in a quiet voice. "He always comes back. I always forgive him." Mary closed the suitcase and looked directly into my eyes. "This time is different, Mother Martha. This time you're not alone." In the dining room, the tension was still palpable. Henry had sat down heavily in his chair, head in hands, muttering threats that now sounded hollow. Charles kept guard, while Robert watched the front door, phone still in hand. The sound of footsteps announced the return of Mary with me and the children. The small suitcase in Mary's hand seemed to contain not only clothes and medicines, but 4 decades of resignation that were finally breaking. "We're leaving now," announced Charles, without taking his eyes off his father. "And don't try to look for her or stop her." Henry raised his head, his eyes, now bloodshot, fixed on me. "If you cross that door, Martha Wilson, you'll never come back," he threatened in a hoarse voice. "And what's mine is mine forever." The silence that followed was so dense it seemed it could be cut. The children held their breath. Mary squeezed my hand. Charles tensed his muscles, ready to intervene. But then I did something no one expected. I took a step toward my husband and, in a clear voice, said, "Goodbye, Henry." Those 2 words I spoke, "Goodbye, Henry," resonated in the house as if they had been shouted, though they were barely a whisper. The power of those words was not in their volume, but in the 42 years it had taken me to pronounce them. Henry froze in his chair. For the first time in our married life, he faced a reality he had never considered possible, that I, his Martha, the woman he had molded through fear and intimidation, was choosing to leave. "This is ridiculous!" He hit the table with his fist, making the plates with remnants of chicken and dumplings tremble. "You won't survive a week without me. Who's going to support you? Who's going to put up with all your complaints and ailments?" The question hung in the hot May afternoon air in Augusta. I, supported by my daughter-in-law, looked for the last time at the kitchen where I had spent thousands of hours preparing the dishes he liked, where I had cried silently while chopping onions, mixing my tears with those the vegetable caused. Charles took the suitcase from Mary's hands and approached the front door, adorned with that typical stained glass that fragmented the sunlight into colors that now seemed ironically festive. "Mom doesn't need you to support her," he said firmly. "She has her children. She has our house. And most importantly, she has the right to a life without fear." Robert and Lucy walked beside me, like small guardians determined to protect their grandmother. Johnny, still in Mary's arms, had stopped crying and observed everything with enormous eyes that seemed to understand more than his young age would allow. "If you leave through that door, Martha," Henry's voice now sounded desperate, a last attempt to maintain control, "there's no turning back. You'll regret it. No one will love you like I've loved you." The word "loved" on that man's lips sounded like blasphemy. Mary, who had been born and raised in a family where love meant respect and not fear, felt a shiver. "Let's go," she said, guiding everyone toward the exit. The taxi should be arriving. Indeed, a yellow taxi characteristic of Augusta stopped in front of the house. The driver, a middle-aged man with a kind face, got out to help with the suitcase, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded inside that yellow-walled house of bitter memories. "Martha!" Henry's shout followed us to the threshold. "Martha Wilson, you can't do this to me!" But I didn't stop. With each step I took toward the door, toward the taxi, toward a life uncertain but free from blows. I felt as if I were walking on glass. Painful, yes, but necessary to reach the other side. The suffocating heat of the street greeted us like a slap. Curious neighbors looked from their windows, some hiding behind curtains, others openly from their gardens. News would travel fast in that neighborhood in Augusta, where everyone knew the Wilsons, where everyone had heard the screams but had chosen to remain silent. Charles helped me into the taxi. His hands, now firm, held mine with a reverence that tried to compensate for years of absence, of complicit silence. "Everything will be fine, Mom," he promised. "No one is going to hurt you anymore." I nodded slightly. My eyes, moist but now without tears, looked for the last time at the house where I had grown old, among fears and silences. The curtain of the main window moved. Henry was watching us, a dark figure behind the glass. The taxi started, leaving behind Pine Street in Augusta, the neighborhood where Martha Wilson had been for 42 years, the submissive wife of Henry Wilson, respected hardware store owner, family man, and unpunished abuser. The journey to Charles and Mary's house in Forest Hills, north of Augusta, passed in a silence loaded with contradictory emotions. The colonial streets of downtown gradually gave way to wider avenues, to modern subdivisions. It was as if we were traveling not only through the city, but through time, from an oppressive past toward an uncertain future. I looked out the window, observing the buildings, the parks, the people walking unaware of the earthquake that had just shaken my life. How many of those women I saw were living in the same hell? How many were waiting for someone to rescue them as I had been rescued today? "Are you okay, Grandma?" Lucy's little voice broke the silence. The girl had taken my hand and held it tightly, as if fearing I might vanish. I looked at my granddaughter. In those childish eyes, I saw something that gave me a glimpse of what my future could be. A life where I wouldn't have to shrink at the sound of heavy footsteps, where I could speak without asking permission, where I could exist without apologizing. "Yes, my child," I answered in a broken but firm voice. I think for the first time in many years, I'm okay. Charles and Mary's house in Forest Hills was modest but spacious, with 3 bedrooms, a small backyard where roses bloomed, and a front porch with a wicker rocking chair. Nothing like the old colonial house in Pine Street, full of shadows and painful memories. When the taxi stopped in front of the white picket fence, I felt a vertigo that forced me to grip the seat. 42 years of marriage had ended in less than an hour. Now I was here, in a place I had visited only on special occasions, always with Henry's permission, always with limited time, always with the obligation to return to my place. "We're home, Mom," said Charles, helping me out of the vehicle. "This is your home now." The interior was bright, with large windows that let in the afternoon breeze. The walls, painted in soft shades of blue and green, contrasted with the dark colors I was used to. Family photographs adorned the walls, Charles and Mary on their wedding day, the children at different stages of growth, happy moments captured forever. "I've prepared the guest room for you," explained Mary, guiding me down the hallway. "Tomorrow we can arrange everything better, but for now there are clean sheets and towels in the bathroom." The room was small but cozy, with a single bed covered with a floral comforter, a nightstand with a lamp, and a light wood wardrobe. A window overlooked the backyard, where the children had a swing and a small inflatable pool for the hottest days. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the softness of the mattress beneath my weight. When was the last time I slept in a bed that I didn't share with Henry? I couldn't remember, perhaps never, since I left my parents' house directly to the altar, barely 17 years old, and with a bouquet of orange blossoms in my trembling hands. "Grandma, do you want to see my seashell collection?" asked Lucy, entering the room with a shoebox decorated with starfish stickers. I gathered them on our last trip to Tybee Island. The girl sat next to me and began showing me small marine treasures: mother-of-pearl shells, dried starfish, stones polished by the waves. I touched them as if they were precious jewels, marveling at the simplicity with which my granddaughter found beauty in these small objects. "They're beautiful, my child," I murmured, feeling a tear roll down my cheek. "Don't cry, Grandma." Lucy dried the tear with her small hand. "Now you'll be with us always. We can go to Tybee Island together and look for more shells. Would you like that?" The promise of a future, of plans, of freedom to choose, hit me with a force greater than any physical blow I had ever received. My body shook with a sob that came from deep within, a cry I had contained for decades. Mary, who was watching from the door, approached and hugged me. She said nothing, just held me as my fragile body shook with liberating tears. In the kitchen, Charles was preparing coffee, his mind a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. Relief for having rescued his mother, guilt for having taken so long to do it, fear for what would come, rage toward his father, toward himself, toward a society that had looked the other way for so long. The phone rang, startling him. The name Dad appeared on the screen. He hesitated a moment before answering. "Where's my wife?" Henry's voice, hoarse and threatening, resonated in the receiver. "I want her back home immediately." Charles took a deep breath before responding. "No, Dad, Mom's staying with us." "That's not your decision." The shout was so loud that Charles had to hold the phone away from his ear. "She's my wife." "I have rights." "The only rights you have are those the law allows you," Charles replied with a calm he didn't feel. "And the law doesn't allow you to hit your wife or threaten her or treat her like she's your property." A tense silence followed his words. "You'll regret this, Charles." Henry's voice was now low, controlled, which made it even more threatening. "Both of you will regret it." The call ended. Charles stared at the phone, feeling a chill run down his spine. He knew his father well enough to know that he wouldn't accept defeat easily. This was just beginning. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, I had managed to calm down. Mary had brought me a chamomile tea, and the children took turns showing me their toys, their drawings, their small treasures, trying to distract me. "Dinner time will be soon," Mary said gently. "Is there anything special you'd like to eat, Mother Martha?" I blinked, confused. Were they asking my opinion? Were they giving me a choice? Whatever you want is fine, I responded automatically. Mary smiled at me tenderly and sat beside me. No, Mother Martha. Here your opinion matters, your wishes matter, you matter. The words, simple but powerful, settled in my battered heart like seeds in fertile soil. For the first time in decades, someone was telling me that I mattered. Maybe, I began timidly, maybe we could make fried chicken. The children like it a lot. Mary nodded, smiling. Fried chicken it will be then. And you can teach me to make it your way. I've always admired how you cook. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange calm. The children played in the garden. Charles made phone calls in a low voice, one to his brother Richard, telling him what had happened, another to a lawyer friend, asking about restraining orders. And Mary and I prepared dinner together. The kitchen filled with familiar aromas, seasoned flour, buttermilk, crispy chicken, corn on the cob. When night fell over Augusta, the family sat at the table. Charles served sodas for the children and sweet tea for the adults. Mary placed the steaming plates in the center. I observed everything as if in a dream, instinctively waiting for someone to tell me when I could start eating, where I should sit. The head of the table is yours, Mom, said Charles, pointing to the place of honor. I sat down slowly, my hands still trembling. The family surrounded me. Charles to my right, Mary to my left, the children across from me, smiling and unaware of the profound meaning of this moment. When everyone was served, Charles raised his glass in a toast. To Mom, he said firmly, to her courage, to her freedom. To Grandma, chorused the children, raising their glasses of soda. I, with 69 years of life and just a few hours of freedom, felt something breaking inside me. But this time, what was breaking were chains. I'll continue with the final part of Martha's story, maintaining the rich details and first-person perspective. The slap that changed everything. Martha's story, part 6 of 6. A year had passed since that Sunday in May when the sound of a slap changed the destiny of the Wilson family. The roses in the garden in Forest Hills had bloomed and withered 3 times, marking the passage of seasons in Augusta. The house, once a temporary refuge, had become my true home. The morning was cool, a rarity in the Georgia heat. I woke up to the birds singing, stretched my arms freely in the single bed that now had a new comforter, chosen by myself in turquoise tones, my favorite color since childhood. I got up unhurried. There was no one to fear, no one to serve under threat. I looked in the mirror, recognizing the woman who looked back at me. My hair, completely white now, fell in soft waves to my shoulders. The deep wrinkles around my eyes seemed softened, as if the year of peace had begun to erase the marks of suffering. I was wearing a cotton nightgown that my sister Lucy had given me on my 70th birthday, celebrated for the first time in decades with a real party. Henry had died 3 months after that fateful Sunday. His heart, weakened by years of rage and excess, finally gave up one August night. Charles had gone to the hospital, had made the necessary arrangements, had dealt with the funeral that I decided not to attend. Instead, I had spent that day with my sister Lucy in Augusta Commons Park, listening to bluegrass music, eating hot funnel cakes bought from a street vendor, a small act of freedom that had tasted like victory. The house in Pine Street, the house where I had suffered for 42 years, had been sold. The money, divided between Charles and Richard, though both had insisted that I take the largest part. It's your compensation, Mom, Richard had told me, who now visited frequently, always bringing sweets for his nephews and flowers for me. For all the years you worked without pay, without recognition, without freedom. At first, I didn't know what to do with the money. I had never managed my own finances. I had never had anything that was truly mine. But with Mary's support, I had learned to manage it. I had opened a bank account in my name, something I was doing for the first time at 70 years old. I had bought small things that gave me joy, plants for the garden, books I had always wanted to read, a cell phone that I was learning to use with Robert's patient help. In the kitchen, I prepared coffee for everyone, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Cooking had transformed from an obligation to an act of love, now that I could choose what to prepare and for whom. Mary entered, already dressed for her day of work at the elementary school. "Good morning, Mother Martha," she smiled, accepting the cup of coffee I offered. "Ready for today?" I nodded, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation fluttering in my stomach. Today was a special day. Today I was going to speak for the first time in the support group for women survivors of domestic violence that I had been attending for months as a silent listener. The group met at a community center in downtown Augusta, in a bright room with windows overlooking a small garden. 15 women of different ages, different social classes, different stories, but united by a common experience: the hell of domestic violence and the struggle to survive it. For months, I had listened to their testimonies, had cried with them, had applauded their small and large victories. I had recognized in each of their stories fragments of my own: the guilt, the shame, the fear, but also the strength, the determination, the ability to be reborn. The group coordinator, a middle-aged psychologist named Ellen, had gently encouraged me week after week to share my experience. "When you're ready," she would say, "there's no rush. Your story has power, Martha. It can help others." And today, finally, I felt ready. Charles drove me to the center in his car. During the journey, I observed the streets of Augusta with new eyes. The city that had been my prison for decades now opened before me as a space of possibilities. I recognized the colonial buildings, the squares with their magnolia trees, the Baroque churches. But now I could enjoy them without the internal clock that always warned me, "You have to go back before he arrives." "Do you want me to come with you?" asked Charles when we reached the community center. I shook my head, smiling. "This is something I need to do alone, son." I entered the building with confident steps. I knew the way to the meeting room, had walked it dozens of times in the past year. But today was different. Today I wasn't just coming to listen. Today I was coming to speak. The women greeted me with warm smiles, with genuine hugs. The chair I always occupied in the farthest corner was free, waiting for me. But today, I chose to sit in the main circle, next to Ellen. When everyone was present, Ellen started the session with some words about the importance of community, of mutual support. Then, she looked at me with an encouraging smile. "Today, we have someone who wants to share her story for the first time," she announced. "Martha, whenever you're ready." I took a deep breath. My hands, once always trembling, were now steady on my lap. I looked at the women surrounding me, saw understanding, support, sisterhood in their eyes. "My name is Martha Wilson," I began, my voice clear and firm. "And for 42 years, my husband beat me." The words, so simple and yet so devastating, hung in the air. Some women nodded in silence, recognizing the courage it took to pronounce them out loud. "It started on our wedding night," I continued. "A slap because, according to him, I had looked too long at one of his friends. He apologized the next day, told me it would never happen again. I believed him. My story now flowed like a river so long contained. I spoke of how the violence had gradually escalated, first insults, then pushes, then blows, of how I had learned to hide the bruises, to invent excuses, to live in constant fear, of how I had protected my children as best I could, though now I understood that the damage caused to them by witnessing that violence was irreparable. I spoke of that Sunday afternoon, of the glass that had slipped from my hands, of the slap that changed everything, of how my daughter-in-law, Mary, had been the first to say enough, of how my son, finally, had dared to confront the monster of his childhood, of how, at 69 years old, I had walked out that door for the first time as a free woman. "Today, I am 71 years old," I said, tears flowing freely down my cheeks, "and I feel like I'm just beginning to live." When I finished my story, the silence in the room was dense, almost tangible. Then, one by one, the women stood up and hugged me. There was no need for words. Each hug said, "I understand you. You survived. You are brave." Ellen approached, her eyes also moist. "Thank you, Martha," she said. Your story will help many women find their own courage. After the session, while having coffee in small groups, a young woman, no older than 25, approached me timidly. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" I nodded, smiling. "How did you do it?" asked the young woman, her eyes reflecting the fear I knew so well. "How did you find the courage after so many years?" I've only been with him for 3 years, and I already don't know how to get out." I took the young woman's hands in mine, those hands that had now become a symbol of comfort and not servitude. "I didn't do it alone," I answered softly. "That's the secret. No one can do it alone. We need other people to help us see what we cannot see, that we deserve a life without fear, without blows, without humiliation." The young woman nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I have a sister," she murmured. "She always tells me I can go to her. Go to her." I squeezed her hands. "Today? Don't wait for another year to pass, and another, and another. Don't do like me, who waited until it was almost too late." When the meeting ended, I walked toward the exit, feeling lighter, as if I had dropped an invisible weight I had carried for decades. The afternoon sun bathed the plaza in front of the community center, where Charles was waiting for me, sitting on a bench. "How was it, Mom?" he asked, getting up to greet me. I smiled, a full smile that lit up my entire face. "Liberating," I answered. Now I understand what Mary and you told me. Talking heals." Charles nodded, putting a protective arm around my shoulders. "Do you want to go home, or shall we stop for that coconut ice cream you like so much?" I thought for a moment. Before, I would never have expressed a preference, would always have said, "Whatever you want is fine." But now, it was different. Coconut ice cream, I decided. And then I want to stop by that plant shop on 5th Street. I saw some beautiful orchids last week. We walked together toward the car, mother and son, on an ordinary afternoon in Augusta. To any observer, we would just be 2 people enjoying the city. No one could guess the hell we had escaped from, the battle we had won. The Georgia sky, an intense, almost unreal blue, stretched above us like a promise. There is life after abuse. There is joy after pain. There is freedom after captivity. And for me, Martha Wilson, 71 years old, survivor, that promise was just beginning to be fulfilled. Thank you so much for joining us for this moving story. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Would you write your city or country in the comments? Your presence in our community is truly valuable. I invite you not to miss our next video. See you in the next story.